and here for this. I'm Patrick Lewis, President and CEO of the Filson Historical Society. Thank you all so much for joining us for tonight's installment in the Theodore Sedgwick Distinguished Lecture Series, produced in partnership with our friends at the Christina Lee Brown Envirome Institute. Round of applause for all of those folks involved. Tonight, we are going to learn about the work of the Envirome in depth with Drs. Bhatnagar and Smith. To keep us moving on, I'll hand the program over to Ambassador Sedgwick.
Well, thank you. It's a great turnout tonight. Thank you all for coming so much. I do hope that you'll come in December because Judge Wolf is an expert on Brandeis, but he's also has a very interesting project which he is spearheading a project on an international anti-corruption court, which would put corrupt leaders into jail like Putin and like Vladimir Putin, and I'm trying to think of other ones. I can't think of them. Anyways, it's going to be a great program today. I'm going to be very brief. Dr. Ted Smith, one of the co-founders, you know, we've been doing these lecture series for a while, and they've been sponsored by the Envirome Institute, but a lot of people don't know about the Envirome Institute, so we thought it'd be great to take a pause and give an in-depth discussion of the Institute, what works it does. Dr. Ted Smith is going to go into the details of some of the projects around here in Louisville. And then Dr. Aruni Bhatnagar is going to talk about how we can extend our lives. He told me he'd share some of the really good tips just with me. And then we're going to end up kind of with a fun interactive program where we'll get your views on the health of Louisville and how we could all improve the public health in the Louisville area. So Dr. Ted Smith, I'll introduce him now. We both share the name Theodore, which technically means gift of God. Somehow his wife and my partner don't subscribe to that idea, but we really are gifts of God, right? And he's a professor of medicine at the U of L. He's also associate dean for research at U of L. And he's director of the Center for Healthy Air, Water, and Soil at the Christina Lee Brown Envirome Institute. And again, I think we're all very grateful to the Institute and Christy Brown for hosting this program. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Todd. And thank you, Christy. And thank you all for coming. It's just amazing how this series has grown and grown. And I hope that this little bit of a teaser, I mean, trust me, we could talk for a long time about what we do at the Envirome Institute. So I was tasked with 7 minutes of the Envirome Institute. So let's see how we do. You have on your chairs a card that has one of those fun QR codes that if you have a smartphone, you could take a picture of the QR code, or sorry, click on it, and it will take you to a survey website. That's actually the fun interactive activity that's at the end of the session this evening. If you're like me, you can just start working on it ahead if you want to, but just didn't want you to be surprised and everybody grab their phones at the last minute. All right, so let's do our whirlwind tour. If you don't know what the Envirome Institute is or anything about it, you certainly could be forgiven. It's not been around that long. And so, you know, here you see a photo taken sort of on the founding day, if you will, in 2018. And for those of you, you know, who maybe are new in town, that was one of our presidents at the University of Louisville. And she was she was wonderful. She's full of energy, and she helped us get this thing off the ground. So we're very grateful to Dr. Bendaputi for the role that she played in all of this. But our home at the moment is that spaceship-looking building called the Cardiovascular Innovation Institute at Muhammad Ali and Floyd, that intersection roughly. And we're in one other building, kind of an unremarkable looking building called Baxter 2, where a lot of the animal research happens. So we're very much in the health sciences campus, along with the hospitals and the medical school and the dental school and the nursing school. So we're in the healthy place, the healthful place. our story has got a complicated origin to it. And so I completely edited Dr. Bhatnagar's slides that he handed me to tell the truth. So kind of the deep origin really was at the School of Medicine, way back in 1998 with some amazing and groundbreaking basic science work in cardiovascular medicine and some very fundamental things about the way the cardiovascular system works, the way the heart works, laboratory work, small animal research in its earliest days, just working out the complexity of the cardiovascular system. Then looking at damage and repair of damage, those mechanisms mechanisms and functions, which is critically important. If you've ever known anybody that's had a stroke or a heart attack, you want to have a system that is able to suffer assaults and recover. And so a lot of that foundational work, this is happening in a period of time when the University of Louisville had a very, very, very strong cardiovascular program. We're world renowned in cardiovascular medicine. And the work with the mechanical heart and the other heart transplant work that the university is well known for. There was a larger enterprise really working the whole system out. And Dr. Bhatnagar and his colleagues were there breaking that ground. That work evolved into, as I talked about damage and repair, issues around tobacco use, issues around air pollution exposure, are natural extensions of that work. And in fact, the whole field of environmental cardiology, the idea that the environment was going to affect the way that your cardiovascular system worked, was a relatively new idea. And, when I got to know Aruni, you sort of talk about the cardiovascular system as a plumbing network, right? Where the pipes, they break, they corrode, they need to be patched, and, sort of an internal mechanical thing. But the work with tobacco and then the work with air pollution demonstrated for the medical community that our cardiovascular system, a lot of the diseases, a lot of the damage is really coming from the environment. And so environmental cardiology was a big shift in the field and how we would think about how to treat yourself well as you age. And so you have that going on, and then some work in diabetes and obesity. That was obviously becoming a significant problem in the country, still is a significant problem in the country. And the role of the cardiovascular system in diabetes and obesity, and interestingly, even things like Alzheimer's, you can sort of think is called type 3 diabetes, that, this whole complex, it's all interrelated. And this is great early work. That birthed a couple of centers that around the time I met Mrs. Brown and her passions around things like air pollution and the health of our city and community, we were doing some things in a sort of a nonprofit fiscal sponsorship of the Community Foundation called the Institute for Healthy Air, Water, and Soil, which we did, I think, some wacky things and some really important and wonderful things. So we had a party where I think we had 200 people pick up an air quality egg and hang it near their house, and that would tell us the air quality across Louisville. And then we did projects like Air Louisville, where we looked at asthma and how that was distributed across the city. So this is work we were all doing, and then we discover Aruni and all of the world famous science that he had pioneered in air pollution and heart disease. And that's when the deal gets done, and we come together, thank you, to create the Envirome Institute, which has elements of all of those things I just described. So there's still a robust basic science program, a robust small animal research program, still working on cardiovascular mechanisms. But I'd like to take some credit for the, taking it to the streets with Christy. So now we're bringing some of the urban environmental concerns, right? So the Center for Healthy Air, Water, and Soil is focused on, let's have a basic ecology that can support our lives and keep us healthy. The Urban Design Studio, which is a long history in Louisville, we got that wrapped up because we knew how important where people live is. And we just recently picked up the Center for Geographic Information Systems out of the Arts and Sciences program. And we're just, I think we're just going to keep growing, into the wonderfulness that our new vision of health is. At our core, we do science. Some of you, those of you in the room that I've worked with, you know that we like to come to conversations in the community, trying to bring what I think of as our superpower. Our superpower is we think science is an important tool for achieving understanding. I think it can be very complementary to other things, other passions that people have. And so, you know, we are a bunch of serious scientists. You know, we hold great positions with many journals and many professional societies. We publish prolifically, and that is because we feel it's very important to move the information into the rest of society and across time. We are probably best known in Louisville for the Green Heart Project. And the Green Heart Louisville Project is an ambitious, the largest of its kind, clinical trial. We call it a drug trial, where the drug is trees and bushes. And we've enrolled a whole bunch of people who were then given the drug, which was a very expensive and hard to implement or administer drug. And that project, and I'll sort of hearken to the circle of health and harmony, which you also have on your seats, to think about health as more than that physical disease kind of mindset, right? And so in the Green Heart Project, you know, we are looking very carefully at the role the environment plays with our physical health, and increasingly now in our psychological health. And so, you know, it's a way to sort of see these connections between these things. We can't really understand physical health without understanding the environment that we're in. And it's hard to understand what's a good environment, what's a healthy environment without the context of us around. So you'll see that that's an important theme in the way that we think about the work that we do. This is just an example to prove that we planted large trees all over the place in South Louisville, but not all over the place, but in very specific places. And just recently we reported out the first post-planting results, which if we have time tonight, we'll talk a little bit about. During the pandemic, many laboratories were sidelined, you know, because they couldn't do what they were supposed to be doing. We launched into a whole enterprise learning about what's in the sewers in Louisville, Kentucky, and we're one of the first groups in the country and in the world to stand up a robust program with support from the James Graham Brown Foundation, the Owsley Brown Family Foundation, and many others, and then ultimately $8.6 million from the CDC to really develop this out. And so if you look at that top graph, the blue line is the level of COVID in the sewers, and the orange line is the people that have COVID in our community. So you can see that the sewers were very predictive. Today, this fall, we're experimenting with JCPS, where we look at flu, influenza A, and we can predict attendance in all of the high schools in this catchment area 2 weeks out. And so we're going to see if we can develop a good working relationship with JCPS to essentially say, hey, the sewers, maybe they can be helpful with your staffing or the way you're thinking, right? A sort of an extension of the greening work that we're doing in the Green Heart Louisville is something called the Traeger Microforest. So right in downtown, I encourage you all to go. It's easy to get to. Think of Muhammad Ali and Fifth. And if you stop there, you'll see it for sure. But we wanted to experiment with what happens when you intensely green a very small area. And in this case, we, with the Traeger family asking us to not only think about the health and the environment, but think about whether it can be part of activating the city. And so, things like financial health, are people going to spend more time downtown? Are they going to have lunch outside? Are they going to meet each other? This is part of an economic recovery story in some sense for Louisville. So we hope that it plays a role there. We think that it's very calming. It's right across the street from a church. There's weddings there occasionally. So we think we can tap into a little spiritual health while we're at it. And then one of our big initiatives out of the Center for Healthy Air, Water, and Soil is the restoration of the Ohio River Basin. This is a long overdue project. Many of America's waterways have benefited from significant federal investment for restoration, whether that's the Chesapeake Bay, whether it's Puget Sound, Great Lakes Basin. We know our Ohio River could use some love and attention and all of the tributaries that feed into it. So with Morgan McGarvey and Representative Houchins across the river, they've introduced this bill to start the process for restoring the Ohio River Basin. There's actually a summit coming up October 16th through 18th at the Golf House. If you don't have any other plans, I encourage you to come down and learn a little bit more about the Ohio River and the basin. And then moving forward, and I know I'm out of time, directionally, where the Envirome Institute is going, if I opened with, we're at the hospital complex with all the hospital-y things and all the disease-oriented things that you see in hospital areas, we're really moving towards a new vision of health that isn't about disease. It isn't about how do we prevent 100 different diseases, but really how do we just have fundamentally good health. And so we use the heart and the cardiovascular system as an indicator. It's a very sensitive thing. It's our weak link as a species. And so we see the things that affect the cardiovascular system are the things that are limiting our life and making it difficult to get around. So we also spent the pandemic thinking through what are the things that we need to focus on to have health fully. And so we are building a new campus downtown, an expansion of the one that we're in. We're getting a divorce from the hospital and all the disease people, and we're going to focus on health. And we're going to do that in this complex, which is also, if you go to Muhammad Ali and Fifth, you will see two buildings that are getting a lot of love and attention right now, and will be the home of our expanded work into nutrition, into physical exercise, into sleep, into stress resilience. And we're going to have a few other people in the complex who will care about a lot about spirituality, cultural health, and some of these other aspects of health in its entirety. So I circled the whole circle when I think about what's going on downtown. And with that framework, I am delighted to introduce my colleague and friend, Dr. Aruni Bhatnagar. Aruni is the director of the Envirome Institute. And really, if you've got the whole history, corralled a whole bunch of people to believe in something, probably without good reason. But they did, they believed in it, and they show up every day and they're excited about what we're doing. And it's always a pleasure to hear his take on anything. And tonight it's going to be on aging, I guess the last decade of life. So with no further ado,
Well, thank you, Ted, for that introduction. As you got me well prepared. But when we first started thinking about this, honestly, I wasn't sure what to call this talk, and we call it the last decade of life. And just like a few minutes ago, somebody asked me, how would you know what is the last decade of life? And so I said, well, that's the game, right? We never know which is going to be the last decade of life. So the point is to live every decade as it was the last decade of life, right? So the idea is that since we do not know what would happen to us and when something would happen to us, we just have to be prepared. And we cannot be prepared in a defensive way, trying to prevent disease and this anti-cancer treatment and then anti-heart disease medication, but in a positive, active way about how can I thrive and flourish in good health. And that itself may be more than sufficient in trying to give us the momentum that we can go forth without being obsessive about disease and disease risk. So rather than talking about a passive sort of prevention strategy, we kind of active health promotion strategy. And how do we think about health? And one of the lessons that we learned from Christy about thinking about health, it's not a simple thing. Health is not about, how's my blood pressure and how's my cholesterol, but also how I am in the world, how I live, and all the domains of my life have a balance so that I'm a healthy, thriving, flourishing human being, which is more important than simply having the right temperature and right blood pressure, right? Those are necessary but not sufficient measures of good life. So how do we actually create a life for ourselves that would be healthy? And more importantly, to the point today, how do we deal with aging, which is a complex problem, and it has to do with understanding how the changes that we undergo, how they affect us during the course of a life. Very fundamentally, we think intuitively that aging is simply, wear and tear. We know everything, cars, washers, or cycles or pens, they go and they break down. And so we think it's natural that if we live for a long time, we would break down. It seems intuitive to us, but like all our intuitions, like the sun goes around the earth, it's completely wrong. We are under no obligation to age. And here I'll explain to you. I will explain to you. So we know from physics that everything goes downhill. everything degrades and that what we call entropy or a disorder in a system increases. But this disorder is not what living things have to encounter because they grow, they change, they adapt, they defend themselves, and they can maintain themselves in a state for varying periods of time. For example, a mouse can only live 2 years, a gorilla, a chimp can live for 30 years, and we can live almost to 100 years. But there's a range of lifespans in the natural world. There is the fly. The mayfly just gets born. It only lives for 5 minutes. It mates and dies. Okay, so it gets whatever the work done. There are other flies that don't even have a gut. They only have reproductive organ because they don't long enough to eat or feed on anything. So that's the sole purpose, is to reproduce. And we should not forget that is the driving force of evolution. But it's not always the case. If you look at the other end of the spectrum, there's a shark that can live over 400 years. Why can't we live up to 400 years? We're not, worse than the shark. I mean, if we are at the pinnacle of evolutionary achievement, we can't even live 200 years. At least 200 would be okay. But there are different lifespans. There are things like the clams that they live for 500 years, which you would think such a humble clam has such potency to be alive for so long. There is also the jellyfish, which is potentially immortal, because they can change their cells. And if you look at some of the cells that they have, you can tease them out. They're almost 1,000 years old. There are trees, at least in the United States, something called the shaking aspen in Utah. It's just one large tree. It's 80,000 years old. It's the oldest living thing in the world. And so there is a large span of life that living systems can go through. Why are we boxed into this small trap? So we need to understand why we age and what we can do. So why do we age? Well, there are two actual reasons why we should age, or two driving forces. One is the genes and one is the environment. Okay, and I'm sure you heard a lot that, you have bad genes, so you're going to die young. But that may be true for some people. But for most people, that's not true. Some people have really good genes, they live longer. But what is the contribution overall in a population of the genes and the environment? And that's the question that we're trying to understand. But what I present to you with data is this. This is lifespan from 1770 to now. And you can see there's almost a twofold increase in the average lifespan of an individual on this planet, particularly in Northern Europe and United States, Australia, and other places. Certainly, genes have not changed in 200 years, and human genes don't change over hundreds of thousands of years, not 200 years. So there is very, very weak argument saying that genes are important. I think certainly the environment plays a key role. And that is why we're trying to understand the Envirome, which is we call as a collection of environmental conditions that determine a health and well-being. The genes are everywhere. Also, animals have genes. There are people have genes, and trees have genes. We share genes with them. I mean, we share 75% of genes with the pumpkin. So, but there are our own genome, and that is just unique to us. So, I'm not talking about any specific individuals. I think we all share 75% genes with the pumpkin. So, but what is it that in the environment that leads to health and could lead to aging? To answer that question, which has been in our minds for a long time, there was a study just came out just early this year, and they looked at almost 500,000 people and looked at 164 different factors which are contributing to health and longevity and which are negatively and positively associated. And they found very few. The one that they had the most was living with a partner, which goes back to our idea of, this is what we call like a cultural health, right? And then number of household vehicles, number of people employed, and all of this are financial health. The socioeconomic status is a key determinant of aging and health. The people who are richer, more educated, live longer, healthier lives. And there is not one thing that's driving, but a range of things. Of course, there's physical activity, but what struck me was being short at age 10. So if you're a really short person at age 10, you have less of the growth hormone, and growth hormone is a big driver of aging. So you live longer. But at the same time, if you were short and you were plump, then it wouldn't work. So you have to, so there is some driving forces that do set us on a different path in our life, but those are also overshadowed by the environment. But what factors in the environment are actually contributing to aging? And what they identified were a few factors. Spending time in nature, having low pollutant exposure, having high fiber intake, and low red meat consumption. All of these are actually related to longevity. And so there is what we call nutritional health, there is environmental health, and then there is physical health. And all of these are actually contributing collectively to our health and well-being. But even with all these controls and changes, how do we actually progress through life? How do we decide what is happening to us at a particular time? And is there a continuous aging process? We just continuously keep going downhill, or we just go through steps and we roll from one stage to another stage? So we have to consider what we call stages of aging and how we can go through, and same individual go through that. Well, you should take a moment and see how beautiful this is. Every time I see these portraits, they take my breath away. So that is a sheer beauty of a person trying to understand who he was and how he went through life, right? At every stage of life, there was introspection, there was an sort of understanding of who he was. And so that's what healthy aging is, to be able to understand your life stages. But in general, scientifically, if you understand that was artistically, scientifically, if you look at that, there are actually identifiable stages. And at each part of life, it's sort of sad to say, you just keep going down the steps, right? So when you're 30 or 35, you feel your muscle function declining. You see that your VO2 max is how much activity, how much oxygen you consume for activity. So your capacity to aerobic exercise decreases. When you're between 40 and 45, there's a hormonal decline. And then there is changes for you have like menopause around 50 and 55. Incidentally, only human females undergo menopause. No other animal undergoes menopause. And that's because humans are born premature. And so the babies need a lot of time for caring. So if the mother had a child when she was 60, she wouldn't be alive to take care of a child for a long time. So we have been programmed to stop reproducing. The women are programmed to stop reproducing at 45 to 55, so that they will still be healthy and thriving till their last child is in their 20s, right? So we go through those changes. Some of them may seem programmed, there's nothing we can do about that, but there are modifications that you can make. There is something called the biological age and the chronological age, and they may not usually match. But when you come later to the point where you go to a tipping point of between 70 to 80, there are three major tipping points: 40, 60, and 80. And in between, you can maintain a steady state, but then suddenly something happens and you're in a different state altogether. So we have to understand what these tipping points are and how we can at least change them a little bit. By the time you're in the 80s, an average person has 3 chronic diseases. And then there is dependence on other people. There is increase in risk of heart disease, and that's what we've been worried about. Almost everybody who's old has heart disease. So why is that? And if we can actually make a small dent, we would make a big difference in the total disease risk. So what are the things that can actually make a difference? And so I want to present 3 or 4 such things. And one of them, the most important we start with, is food. And food is critical in all aspects of health, because that's the maximum intake that we have. When we eat, we expose ourselves to 35,000 chemicals every day that are in the food. And that's the biggest exposure that we can imagine. Now, there are lots of work that has been going on food, and we've been trying to ask the question, can some types of diets slow down aging? And I'm sure you've heard of all of this because there's so much in the literature and so much in the media. Every magazine you pick up, from Cosmopolitan to New Scientist, talks about these diets. So there is a time-restricted feeding, there is a restriction in calories, there's a protein restriction, and there is, of course, the famous keto diet. Well, the keto diet is actually a very low-carb diet, and it is about, and low-calorie, and high calories from fat, only 20-30% from carbohydrates. It's actually been known since the 1930s because it was used to treat epilepsy. And it is it makes a big difference, especially people with type 2 diabetes, that there could be some benefits. But sort of a complete dependence on meat is going to cause frailty and muscle loss and some nutritional deficiencies. When you first go on a keto diet, you get what they call a keto flu. And so it's like you have a flu as you get used to the ketone bodies in your thing. But for some people, it works. And I'm not making any claims about what works or what doesn't work. It's between you and your physician. So I'm going to stay out of that. But what I'm saying is this is what the current knowledge is. So what people have now gone to what they call lazy keto diet, or they call the dirty keto. So the lazy keto and dirty keto is like, well, once in a while you can have a carb, you can have a cake, or or a piece of bread. But so otherwise, if you go strictly keto, then it could have in weight loss. But especially for older people, that could interfere with your medication use. So a better diet for that would be something we know as a Mediterranean diet. And the Mediterranean diet is something that has nuts and grains and vegetables and fish and some poultry. And if you want more information, I think the American Heart Association recommends for all senior citizens or all people of all ages, actually, the Mediterranean diet is the best for your heart health. But it's not only what you eat, it's also when you eat it. So if you say have, like, for example, time-restricted feeding. So every day you just eat at a particular time. And there's nothing else. You eat all you want, anything, all the carbs and the ketones and the meat and the vegetables, but whatever, but all at the same time. And then you go through what we call intermittent fasting. You go through a period where you don't eat anything. And so that seems to work well with some people. There are lots of studies showing that it improves your metabolic health. It can stabilize your blood pressure and decrease your inflammation. But most importantly, circadian rhythms. And I come back to this theme again, is this synchrony with the world outside, that if you are sort of dissociated from the rhythms of the world and you march to your own beat of your own drum, there is a price to pay. So there is something that sort of keeps us tethered to the daily rhythms of the day and night cycles, the seasons. And so the more we are attuned to that, more helpful it is. But there are still some issues with the time-restricted feeding. Sometimes people are very, very strict about when they eat, so it interferes with socializing and being around people. And I'll talk about that too, how important that may be. But the thing that we know that works the best, right from the yeast to a single nematode, a little worm, to monkeys, is caloric restriction. And this caloric restriction is just decreasing 30% of the calories that you have. And this is the studies they've done with monkeys. And you can see there's health span benefits, and there's also reduction in a range of symptoms. And if you see these animals, the diet-restricted animals seem 20 years younger. Their coat is well-groomed, they look healthier, they have no cataract, and they do really, really well. Even mice who are on low-fat diet, on low-calorie diet, are very, very good. But it depends upon what you substitute food with. Whether if it's a plant source or not a plant source, that you would have slightly different outcomes, particularly in terms of mortality extension. So the idea is that maybe if you just ate less, it'll be good. And this is reinforced by this island. It's called the Okinawa Islands in Japan. This island has the highest number of centenarians in the world, right? There are literally hundreds of women who are hundreds of years old, and more than 100 years old. And the secret of the success is they consume less calories on an everyday basis. And they live in this island where they have lower levels of stress, but very low protein. They have high carb diets, but they live very long lives with relatively disease-free. So this is what some people call the blue zones of the world. And there's a whole set of ideas that we should just look at blue zones and see, why do people thrive over there? The issue with that is, of course, there's diet, but they also live in a very close-knit community. These women are interacting with each other. They belong to families and traditions that for centuries have kept their lives organized in their social structures, which could be a great motivating force. So we can't dissociate all of that, but still, it does have the idea that decreasing these levels of food is good. And now we have all of these GLP agonists, so you can call them Ozempic or Mounjaro. They actually do the same thing, which is they work on your brain centers and decrease your appetite, so just eat less. And that's been miraculous. It's been shown that they have strong positive effects in decreasing frailty, improving cardiovascular health, even increasing longevity and sort of slowing down aging. So just losing so much weight would make a big difference. So the idea then maybe even if you don't sort of adhere to any particular food consumed, a keto diet or a low protein diet, but just eating in sync with same circadian rhythms, and then having less food seems to make a difference. The other thing that makes a big difference in addition to food is, of course, sleep. The sleep is a foundational aspect of our biology. There is something in us that we have to sleep. It says anything that has a brain needs to sleep. Even a jellyfish, sometimes has to sleep because of the whole activity that they do. The reason we need sleep is because when we sleep, their blood goes out from your brain and what we call lymphatics rise up, and they actually wash your brain completely of all the toxins that have accumulated during the day. And if you don't do that, you get disoriented, you can't think, you can't act, your body cannot control its metabolism or temperature, and it is a big issue. They just did an interesting study where they took these college students, they put them in a room, and all they gave them was to eat pizza and didn't let them sleep for more than 4 hours a night. And after like 2 weeks, they were completely pre-diabetic, their insulin resistance, they were disoriented more than usually college students are. They were more disoriented than so they were just 2 weeks off would create these problems. So we need to sleep, and that's such a critical need for the biology that we are. If you don't sleep, and suppose you sleep less or you sleep more, both are equally bad. So as you can see that sleep duration is short, which is less than 8 hours, so maybe 6 hours, 7 hours, then you have a 12% increase in early death. And if you sleep for more than 9 hours, there's a 30% increase in early death, because long sleep times actually mean that there's something wrong with your physiology, that you really do need to rest so much. So too much sleep, too little sleep is equally harmful. But again, it's not the amount of sleep that you get, but when you sleep. So now this is a little complicated, but if you look at the second graph, that shows the sleep duration. So as the sleep duration decreases, the people with the red line are sleeping the less, so they die earlier. This is almost within 8 years. There's lots of people you're following for 8 years, and they die earlier. But if you don't maintain a consistent bedtime, it is a much more greater death, because it's not the amount of sleep that's so critical, but every day going to sleep at the same time, even on weekends getting up at the same time, and not having much variation. So the idea is that if we set a consistent bedtime sleep routine, and that we create an area that's dark and that's conducive, it's called a sleep environment, and then go through the same process every day, then that is more critical, even if some days you get less sleep. The idea is also, though, you don't need to fret if once in a while you don't sleep well. Some people get really upset and they have the aura rings and they will go and start shaking like, oh my God, I had a really bad day and now I can't do anything. Well, everybody goes through poor nights, and that's okay. But overall, being consistent has its merits, and being in sync with the circadian rhythms, because every day there are about 20 to 30% of genes that go up and down and cycle with the sunlight. So one of the best things you can do if you want to synchronize your thinking ability and your sleep timings is to have very strong sunlight exposure early in the morning, and then have very little sunlight exposure late in the day, including cell phones and blue light in the night. So light is a great driver. We don't understand, or we don't realize that we are like plants. We undergo photosynthesis. We cannot live without the sun any more than plants can live without the sun, because we need sunlight not only to make vitamin D, but to boost our immunity, boost our mood, to make all the hormones that we make, regulate blood pressure. So we have to be out in nature and with association with sun. But as we age, sleeping becomes progressively problematic. Old people have difficulty falling asleep or staying asleep. They have more fragmented sleep. I'm sure that there's a famous poem by Yeats which says, when you're old and full of sleep. So that's what people are, that as you get old, you get full of sleep. And so they sleep during the daytime, they snore and gasp during sleeping, and then that sort of fragments the sleep. But it is very sort of difficult to be able to correct that. And the only one way of that is to be able to think about having consistent time and be able to be deliberate about your sleeping habits. Sleep is not a luxury, but essential to health and well-being. The other thing that can help, and this is a nod to our cultural health, is music. So there are a lot of studies show that music-assisted relaxation can improve sleep quality. And then you could have, there is something about fundamental in our biology that responds to music. And many people have actually studied that music can reduce anxiety in patients with heart disease and people with mechanically ventilated patients. And the reason we have all this data, because when they're in the hospital, you can measure all these things on a continuous basis. So we know that these troubled people and who have been through really hard times, music does make a difference. I have a friend which Christina introduced us to, and her name is Renee Fleming, and she was telling about her experience that if you go to these places in old homes and they're very old people with Alzheimer's and they don't remember their children's name or their name and where they are, but if you play music from the time when they were young, they get up and start dancing and they realize, and they light up because it connects them to the world they once knew. And so music has this incredible power to move, and it syncs this sort of primeval beat that we have at the heart. And so people have done how music would affect heart, and this is called heart rate variability. So the lower the heart rate variability is, on this scale, the better it is. So you can see, which actually means higher because it's a whole way of expressing it. Anyway, so when you have silence, you have a high, and then it's pleasant, it gets low and gets lower, and it's unpleasant, it starts rising up again. So music is really an interesting calming effect. You can actually, there are studies, you can lower your blood pressure by timing to music. And you can listen to that, and then, each person responds differently, but there's something about the rhythm that we have. And some people believe that's old evolution, it's just a long evolutionary reason, because when you are in utero, you listen to the heartbeat of your mother, and that's the first sound you hear. And that rhythm sort of makes that, over that rhythm, your whole life is then sort of, that provides a framework for the rest of your life. So that's why we respond so primarily to rhythm. Of course, music can also help you exercise. We know that if you have listening to music can increase not only your ability to exercise, but also how much you can exercise. And you don't even perceive the pain because you're so busy listening to the music. So you can do more than you can actually do without music. And suddenly it becomes less boring. That's my personal sort of little experience. But it is a big, I would say, motivator and accompaniment. And so to be able to exercise. Which does bring us to the whole thing about exercise, which is, again, in addition to food and sleep, the third main pillar of well-being. And this exercise is, it's sort of good for your cardiovascular health. There's a lot of benefits, and I don't have to stand here and tell you, everybody knows how good exercise is. And the point is that as we age, exercise becomes progressively important. People think, well, going to the gym and lifting weights and running marathons is for young people. And it is, I'm sorry, but it is, there's also a great benefit. At my age, I may not be able to run a marathon, but I'm not any sort anymore, whatever else, poorer for that. So, but it is that some level of physical activity is absolutely essential, and that keeps us motivated and also keeps us physically fit. So what are the 4 pillars of healthy exercise? Well, we need flexibility, and we need motility, which can reduce sort of stiffness, and it can be aid to arthritis. It can also increase our balance, and that is a key issue. People don't realize the biggest problem with as you age is falling risk. And therefore, if you maintain good balance, that is the number one physical sort of attribute that you need to preserve. We were talking about this, how do you tell how old you are? Just try standing on one foot for 30 seconds and you'll figure out how old you are. And that's a challenge, 30 seconds. But if you want a real challenge, you stand on one foot with your eyes closed. If you exceed 10 seconds, you're exceedingly healthy. Okay, even young people cannot do more than 15 seconds just standing on one foot with both the eyes closed. So the balance is a critical part, and we need to do what we can to maintain them. Then muscle strength and bone strength, because that's going to be important. There's falling risk, osteoporosis, and just generally loss of bone cells that happens with age. So that's all could be maintained by exercise. And then we have other ways of maintaining aerobic fitness. The best way to do is to maintain aerobic fitness is to be able to walk. Walking is an incredible exercise, and so is running. If there was one thing that human beings evolved to do, was running and walking. We can outwalk any living creature in the planet. Even outwalk dogs and horses. They start panting and lose breath, but the way we can keep walking and running, because we have at least 3 times more sweat glands than any other animal. So we evolved just to walk and run all the time. Sitting is the worst thing as a human being you can do. So it is that this constant movement is what we have been evolved to. So walking, swimming, dancing, I don't know where my slide went, but there's about 400 sort of studies that they collected and did a meta-analysis. And what they found was that dancing was better at reducing depression than was yoga or Tai Chi or even antidepressants. And dancing with another other person or a group of people is even better, right? So you not only develop a social interaction, but you move. And again, because of this our primeval link to music, moving with music actually creates a whole set of neurological states that are very conducive to health and well-being. Then, of course, you have to think about resistance training. You have to do that to be able to develop muscle strength, especially if you're on a GLPs, you have to worry about muscle loss there. But the squats, push-ups, and all those things are really, really beneficial. The best is you lean against the wall and you do a squat. That's the best exercise for reducing your blood pressure. Within 10 minutes, if you do 6 of that, your blood pressure will come down. So it is this sort of activity is really critical. And so it can prevent muscle loss and preserve bone density. And then balance and coordination. You know, we have a friend who loves to teach us Tai Chi. So we have been through a couple of classes. But anyway, so Tai Chi is really good because it's very slow and it's non-injurious. We can do yoga and standing on one leg. They had heel to toe walking. And if you've done that, that's really incredible. But anyway, so those things are very good for balance. But then you have to talk about flexibility and mobility. That's again, stretching and doing yoga and Pilates. So that's critical too. But also functional training. The simplest thing to do is just sit and stand 5-6 times a day, take the stairs. There are people who have homes that are just simply on one floor, which is called a ranch house. They call the ranch-legged people because they never climb stairs. So when they get old, their legs, they're not used to climbing stairs at all. So the more stairs you climb, the better off you're going to be. But with all of this, you say, well, what am I supposed to do? Am I supposed to live or just exercise all the time? Well, you don't have to do so much all of that. There are the minimal recommendations, 150 minutes a week, just moderate aerobic exercise. Sometimes it plateaus. It doesn't matter if you do a whole lot of exercise, it's not going to make a big difference. And 2-3 days a week, you do resistance training and then walking. But there are some other things that are important. And the other couple of things is, I don't know whether there was a slide there, but about being spiritual. So people who go to spiritual services, women who went, this is a nurses' health study from Harvard, women who go to sort of a service once a week live 12 years more than women who don't go to services. There are people who actually are spiritual, religious people are at least half as less likely to be depressed, have social interactions, and live on average 5 to 7 years longer because they have a positive attitude in life. We've done many tests to predict a well-being. The best test we found, which is correlated with your outcomes better than cholesterol and blood pressure and smoking, is what we call purpose of life questionnaire. There are 10, if you're interested, you can take the test. There are 10 questions about what your purpose in life is. And if you have a strong purpose in life, which means a higher score on this test, you're going to live longer, you'll be more resilient. Because then you have something to live for rather than just to live in an abstract sense. So religious does that thing. What else does it was grandparenting. And I say that I have nieces and the 2 of them, and it's completely changed their life. You cannot sit quiet for like 5 minutes when they're in the house, and which is like every weekend, thankfully. So they they've shown that both grandfathers and grandmothers have higher rates of life satisfaction and quality of life. And grandmothers have fewer depressive symptoms, and then they are interacting with their grandchildren. They report more happiness, they're more resilient to disease, and they feel better. We don't know, there's not been a long-term study to show that they are better, but they feel better. There is actually a whole serious hypothesis called grandmother hypothesis, which is the reason human beings survive, because human women live longer, long enough to take care of their grandchildren so their daughters can have more children. So therefore, more humans have survived because of grandmothers than mothers. And so grandmothers, only human grandmothers do that, because humans, I'm going to finish, if there's one thing that is human about a human being, is to be able to take care of each other. So we have all these bones from the apes and the Neanderthals and the Homo erectus and the Homo afarensis. What distinguished Homo sapiens was that they found bones of this 60-year-old woman who must have had this fracture when she was 30. So somebody took care of her for 30 years so that she could live those lives. No other animal does that, okay? Because we are the people who take care of ourselves and our people around us, and that's what gives meaning to our lives and brings health and well-being. So in the end, there is no fountain of youth. Unfortunately, there is no place we can go and dip and become young all over again. And so what we are supposed to do, all we're supposed to do is to think about how we can add to all the dimensions of our life and our health, and then be able to develop in all these domains equally, so then that we are in harmony and we are resilient. We cannot change as yet, although all of these tech bros are trying very hard. We cannot as yet change the course of nature, and sooner or later there has to be wise acceptance of what it is, what we have, life has to offer to us, right? But in the meantime, we just have to live well and to be able to flourish and thrive without this disease. And if we do the right things, I think we can. Thank you.